The crimson horizon swallowed the setting sun as Nora Reynolds clutched her shawl tightly around her shoulders, watching dust clouds rise in the distance. Another day ending in Pine Creek, Arizona Territory, 1885, another day without answers. The stagecoach approaching brought more than just mail. It carried hope that someone might know something about the husband she'd lost 6 months ago, leaving her alone with 2 children and a struggling homestead. Nora's auburn hair whipped across her face as the wind picked up. At 26, her once soft features had hardened under the relentless western sun, and the burden of raising 5-year-old Sarah and 7-year-old James by herself. She'd never imagined this life when she'd married Thomas Reynolds 8 years ago, a life of constant worry, of wondering if the food would last, if the well would run dry, if she could keep the wolves, both animal and human, at bay. The stagecoach rumbled to a stop before the town's only hotel, and Nora's attention was drawn to a tall figure dismounting from a paint horse that had clearly seen many miles. His movements were fluid, practiced a man who lived in the saddle. The stranger adjusted his worn Stetson, revealing dark hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. The holster on his hip carried a Colt revolver that looked as much a part of him as his own hand. "You waiting on someone, madam?" Sheriff Lyle Miller's voice startled her. "Just hoping for news," Nora replied, her eyes still on the stranger. "That'd be Cole Nicholson," the sheriff offered, following her gaze. "Passing through from Tucson, I reckon. Heard he's been tracking something, or someone," Nora murmured. "Best head home, Mrs. Reynolds, storm's brewing." Nora nodded, reluctantly turning toward her wagon. The children were with Mrs. Wilson at the general store, probably being spoiled with rock candy. She'd need to collect them before making the hour-long journey back to their homestead. As she turned the corner, she nearly collided with the stranger Cole Nicholson. "Pardon me, madam," he said, his voice deep and gentle, at odds with his rugged appearance. His eyes were a striking blue against his sun-darkened skin. "No harm done, Mr. Nicholson." The name felt strange on her tongue, his eyebrow arched in surprise. "You have me at a disadvantage." "Small town," she explained with a hint of a smile. "Sheriff Miller mentioned you were passing through." Cole nodded, studying her face with an intensity that made her cheeks warm. "And you are?" "Nora Reynolds. My children and I have a place about 5 miles east." Something flickered in his eyes at the mention of children. "Traveling alone, my husband." She started, then shook her head. "It's just the 3 of us now." Before Cole could respond, James and Sarah came running from the general store, faces sticky with candy. "Mama," Sarah called, wrapping her small arms around Nora's skirts. James hung back, eyeing Cole suspiciously. "These are my children, James and Sarah," Nora said, her hand protectively on Sarah's head. Cole knelt down to the children's level, his imposing figure becoming less threatening. "Pleased to meet you both." He tipped his hat to them, which made Sarah giggle. James stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between Cole and his mother. "Do you shoot bad men, mister?" Cole's expression softened. "Only when there's no other choice, son." Nora cleared her throat. "We should be heading back. It'll be dark soon." "Madam," Cole said, standing, "those clouds don't look friendly. You might consider staying in town tonight." "We can't afford that luxury, Mr. Nicholson." Nora's pride didn't allow her to admit how tight things had become. Cole seemed about to argue, then nodded. "Then at least let me ride alongside your wagon a ways. Those roads can get treacherous after dark." "That's not necessary, Mama, please." Sarah tugged at her skirt. "He could protect us from wolves." Nora looked down at her daughter's hopeful face, then back at Cole. There was something in his eyes, concern perhaps, or something deeper that made her hesitate. Finally, she nodded. "Very well, Mr. Nicholson, we'd be grateful for the company." As they loaded into the wagon, Nora couldn't help but wonder why this stranger was offering help. Most men passed through Pine Creek without a second glance at a widow and her children. But there was something about Cole Nicholson that suggested he wasn't most men. The journey began quietly, with Cole riding alongside the wagon, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. The children peppered him with questions about his travels, which he answered patiently. "Have you been to California?" James asked eagerly. "Yes, indeed," Cole replied. "Saw the Pacific Ocean stretch out like the sky had fallen into the water." "Did you fight Indians?" James pressed. Cole's expression grew serious. I found most fights can be avoided with respect and understanding, son. Nora glanced at him with new appreciation. Thomas had always spoken of Indians with disdain and fear. What brings you to Pine Creek, Mr. Nicholson? Nora finally asked as the wagon jolted over a particularly rough patch of road. Cole was silent for a moment. Following a trail that's gone cold too many times. A manhunt? Her grip tightened on the reins. Justice, he corrected, for a family that lost something precious. The sky darkened ominously above them and the first fat raindrops began to fall. Nora clicked her tongue, urging the horses faster, but within minutes, the rain came down in sheets. There's a line shack about a quarter-mile ahead, Cole called over the downpour. Used it once when I rode for the Rocking D. Nora nodded gratefully. The children were already huddled beneath a blanket, and the wagon's canvas cover provided little protection against the driving rain. The line shack was little more than a one-room shelter with a stone fireplace, but it was dry. Cole helped Nora and the children inside, then went back out to tend to the horses and retrieve their supplies. By the time he returned, soaked to the skin, Nora had managed to start a small fire with the dry kindling left by previous occupants. "You're handy with a fire, Mrs. Reynolds," Cole observed, shrugging off his drenched coat. "Necessity teaches quickly," she replied, wringing water from her skirt. "And please call me Nora. Formality seems silly under the circumstances." "Nora," he repeated, as if testing the sound of it. "I'm Cole." The children had already spread their bedrolls near the fire and were drifting to sleep, exhausted from the excitement and the journey. Nora covered them with a blanket, brushing a strand of hair from Sarah's forehead. "They're good children," Cole said softly, watching from across the fire. "They've had to grow up too fast," Nora sighed, sitting back on her heels. "Especially James. He feels he needs to be the man of the house now." Cole nodded, understanding in his eyes. "What happened to their father, if you don't mind my asking?" Nora was silent for a long moment, watching the flames. "Thomas went to Tucson 6 months ago to sell some cattle. He never returned," her voice caught. "Some say he took the money and ran off with a saloon girl. Others think he was robbed and killed. I don't know which would be worse." "You don't believe he left willingly," Cole observed. "No," she said firmly. "Thomas had his faults, but he loved his children." Cole added another log to the fire. "How are you managing the homestead 1 day at a time?" Nora admitted. "I've sold most of the cattle. We grow enough to eat, and I sell eggs and butter in town when I can." She looked up, pride flashing in her eyes. "We're surviving, Mr. Nicholson." "Cole," he reminded her gently. Their eyes met across the fire, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had weathered storms both literal and figurative. Nora was the first to look away. "We should get some rest," she said, moving to her bedroll. "The road will be muddy tomorrow." Cole nodded, settling against the wall near the door, his gun belt within easy reach. "Sleep well, Nora." As she lay beside her children, Nora found herself studying Cole's profile in the dying firelight. There was something comforting about his presence, something that made her feel safer than she had in months. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. Dangerous because it reminded her of what she'd lost and what she couldn't afford to hope for again. Morning came with clearing skies and birdsong. Nora woke to find Cole already outside, tending to the horses. The children were still asleep, their small faces peaceful in the early light. "Coffee," Cole offered when she stepped outside, hair hastily pinned up and shawl wrapped around her shoulders. "That would be wonderful," Nora admitted, accepting the tin cup he held out. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what she needed. They stood in companionable silence, watching the sun burn away the last of the storm clouds. "Your place is much farther?" Cole finally asked. "Just over that ridge." Nora pointed east. "You can see the chimney on a clear day." Cole nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll see you safely home, then I should be moving on." Something like disappointment flickered in Nora's chest, but she pushed it away. "Of course. You've been more than kind already." The remainder of the journey passed quickly. When they crested the final ridge, Nora's modest homestead came into view, a small cabin with a stone chimney, a barn badly in need of repair, and fields that were more weed than crop. "It's not much," Nora said, feeling suddenly self-conscious under Cole's appraising gaze. "It's a home," he replied simply. As they approached, Nora noticed something amiss. The front door of the cabin stood ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. "Wait here," Cole said, his hand moving to his revolver. "James, watch over your mama and sister." James nodded solemnly, standing straighter. Cole dismounted and approached the cabin cautiously, gun drawn. Nora held her breath, one arm around Sarah and the other hand gripping the wagon's seat until her knuckles turned white. After what seemed an eternity, Cole emerged from the cabin, holstering his weapon. "Someone's been through your things," he reported grimly. "Took food, mostly from what I can tell. They're long gone now." Nora closed her eyes briefly, relief mingling with despair. It wasn't the first time. Resources were scarce, and a woman alone with children was an easy target. "Thank you for checking," she said, climbing down from the wagon. "We'll manage." Cole's expression hardened. "This has happened before." It wasn't a question, but Nora nodded anyway, 3 times since Thomas disappeared. "Sheriff Miller rides out when he can," but she shrugged, the gesture conveying the reality of frontier law enforcement better than words could. Cole surveyed the property, his gaze lingering on the broken fence, the patchy fields, the barn door hanging from one hinge. "I could stay a day or two," he offered. "Help with some repairs." "You said you were tracking someone," Nora reminded him, even as hope rose traitorously in her chest. "The trail's not getting any fresher," Cole admitted, "and it looks like you could use an extra set of hands." Before Nora could respond, Sarah tugged at Cole's pant leg. "Can you fix my doll's house?" Pa was going to, but then he went away. Cole knelt down, meeting the little girl's earnest gaze. "I'd be honored to, Miss Sarah," and just like that, it was decided. Cole Nicholson would stay for a day or two, he said. But as Nora watched him unload his saddlebags, she couldn't help but wonder if fate had other plans. The first day, Cole repaired the barn door and reinforced the chicken coop. By evening, he'd fixed 3 broken fence posts and cleaned out the well. He worked without complaint, stopping only when Nora called him for the simple stew she'd prepared. "This is good," he said, accepting a second bowl. "Been a long time since I had a home-cooked meal." "It's nothing special," Nora demurred, "but we're glad to share what we have." James had spent the day following Cole like a shadow, handing him tools and asking endless questions about guns, horses, and life on the trail. Now he sat beside Cole at the table, unconsciously mimicking the way the older man held his spoon. "Mr. Cole, are you a real cowboy?" Sarah asked, her legs swinging beneath her chair. Cole smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "I've been a lot of things, Sarah. Cowboy, cavalry scout, freight driver. These days I mostly work for myself." "As what?" James pressed. Cole's eyes met Nora's briefly before answering. "Sometimes I find things or people that are lost." "Could you find our pa?" Sarah asked innocently. A heavy silence fell over the table. Nora set down her spoon, her appetite gone. "Sarah, Mr. Nicholson isn't here to. If I could, I would," Cole interrupted gently, his gaze still on Nora. "But right now, I think your ma needs help right here." That night, after the children were asleep, Nora found Cole sitting on the porch steps, smoking a cigarette and staring at the stars. "Thank you," she said, wrapping her shawl tighter against the evening chill, "for not making promises to them about Thomas." Cole nodded, flicking ash from his cigarette. "Children deserve honesty even when it's hard." Nora sat beside him, careful to maintain a proper distance. "The man you're tracking, he did something terrible, didn't he?" "Yes," Cole's voice was flat. "He killed a woman, left her children motherless." The stark words hung in the night air between them. "I'm sorry," Nora said softly. "Been on his trail for almost 2 years now," Cole continued, his voice distant. "Every time I get close, he slips away. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever find him." "Why keep trying then?" Cole turned to look at her, his expression solemn in the moonlight. "Because I promised those children I'd bring them justice." Nora nodded, understanding. Promises to children matter. They sat in silence for a while, the night sounds of the desert coyotes calling, wind through sage wrapping around them like a blanket. "You should go inside," Cole finally said. "It's getting cold." Nora hesitated, then stood. "Good night, Cole." "Good night, Nora." As she closed the door behind her, Nora pressed a hand to her chest, where something long dormant had begun to stir. It was foolish, she knew, to feel anything for a man who was only passing through, a man whose path was set on a course far from Pine Creek. Yet she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her when he looked at her, or the sense of security his presence brought. One day became 3, then a week. Cole fixed the leaking roof, reinforced the chicken coop, repaired the wagon wheel, and built Sarah's dollhouse. Each morning, Nora expected him to announce his departure. Each evening, he found one more thing that needed fixing, one more reason to stay another day. The children bloomed under his attention. James followed him everywhere, soaking up knowledge about horses, carpentry, and tracking. Sarah drew pictures of Cole alongside their family, placing him firmly in their lives as if he'd always been there. And Nora found herself smiling more, laughing even. She caught herself watching Cole as he worked, admiring the strength in his hands, the kindness in his eyes when he spoke to her children. At night, she lay awake, trying to remind herself that he would leave eventually. Men like Cole Nicholson didn't settle down, especially not with a widow and 2 children on a struggling homestead. One afternoon, as Cole was teaching James how to mend a bridle, a rider approached from the direction of town. Nora shaded her eyes against the sun, recognizing Sheriff Miller's bay horse. "Afternoon, Mrs. Reynolds," Miller called, tipping his hat as he dismounted. His eyes narrowed slightly when he spotted Cole. "Nicholson, didn't expect to see you still around." "Sheriff," Cole acknowledged with a nod. "Just lending a hand." Miller's gaze traveled over the repaired fence and barn. "So I see." He turned back to Nora. "Got some news you might want to hear, madam. Mind if we speak privately?" Nora's heart quickened. "Of course." "Cole, would you mind watching the children?" Cole nodded, his expression guarded as he led James back toward the barn. Nora led the sheriff to the porch. "Is it about Thomas?" Miller removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture that immediately told Nora the news wasn't good. "Found a body outside Tucson." Had papers identifying him as Thomas Reynolds. The world seemed to tilt beneath Nora's feet. She gripped the porch railing for support. How did he die?" "Shot, madam. Robbery most likely. They found him in a ravine, picked clean of valuables. Must have been there for months." Nora closed her eyes, a strange mixture of grief and confirmation washing over her. Deep down, she'd known Thomas wasn't coming back. Now at least she knew why. "There's more," Miller continued awkwardly. "Banks foreclosing on your place, Mrs. Reynolds. Thomas took out a loan before he left. Seems he never made the payments." This news hit Nora like a physical blow. "How long do we have?" "End of the month," Miller said apologetically. "I'm real sorry, Mrs. Reynolds." Nora nodded numbly. "Thank you for telling me, Sheriff." After Miller rode away, Nora remained on the porch, trying to gather her strength before facing the children with the news of their father. She didn't hear Cole approach until he spoke. "Nora." His voice was gentle. "Bad news," she turned to him, tears finally breaking free. "Thomas is dead. And we're losing the farm." Without hesitation, Cole stepped forward and took her in his arms. Nora stiffened briefly, then melted against him, allowing herself this moment of weakness. His arms were strong around her, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair. "About Thomas." Nora pulled back slightly, wiping her eyes. "I've suspected for months. Now at least I can tell the children something definite." She took a shaky breath. "But the farm, I don't know what we'll do, where we'll go." Cole's hands remained on her shoulders, warm and steady. "What about family? None that would take us in." Nora shook her head. "My parents died years ago and Thomas was estranged from his family." "You could sell what's left of the cattle, find a place in town," Cole suggested. "It wouldn't last long," Nora said practically. "And then what?" "Take in washing, work at the saloon." She shuddered at the thought. Cole was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "There's another option," he finally said. "I could pay off the loan." Nora stepped back, shock replacing grief on her face. "I can't let you do that." "Why not?" Cole's voice was calm, reasonable. "I've got money saved. Been on the trail so long, haven't had much to spend it on. Because..." Nora struggled to articulate the tangle of pride, propriety, and fear that made his offer so impossible to accept. "Because you're leaving, Cole, and then what?" "I'd be in debt to a man who's gone." Something flickered in Cole's eyes, hurt, perhaps, or disappointment. "Is that what you think? That I'd hold it over you?" "No," Nora admitted softly, "but I can't build a future on charity, no matter how kindly offered." Cole stepped closer again, his gaze intense. "What if it wasn't charity? What if I stayed?" Nora's heart stuttered. "You have your hunt. The man you're tracking has eluded me for 2 years," Cole finished. Maybe it's time to build something instead of chasing ghosts." He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I care about you, Nora, about James and Sarah too." Hope, dangerous and fragile, bloomed in Nora's chest. "You barely know us." "I know enough," Cole said simply. "I know you're brave and proud and determined. I know those children need stability and love. I know I felt more peace here in 1 week than I have in years of wandering." Nora searched his face, looking for any sign of hesitation or deceit. She found only earnestness and a warmth that made her breath catch. "It wouldn't be proper," she whispered, one last token resistance. A small smile curved Cole's lips. "Then marry me." The words hung between them, stunning in their simplicity and their weight. Nora's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. It was too soon. She barely knew him. What would people say? But beneath those concerns, a deeper truth resonated. In Cole's presence, she felt safe, respected, seen. Before she could respond, James's voice called from the barn. "Ma, is everything all right?" Nora stepped back, reality crashing in. "I need to tell them about their father," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And I need time, Cole, to think." Cole nodded, respect in his eyes. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Telling the children about Thomas was one of the hardest things Nora had ever done. James took the news with a stoic face that broke her heart, while Sarah crawled into her lap and cried until she fell asleep. Through it all, Cole remained nearby, a silent support, stepping in only when James finally broke down and needed strong arms to hold him. That night after the children were asleep, Nora found Cole again on the porch steps. Without a word, she sat beside him, closer this time. "They're finally sleeping," she said softly. Cole nodded. "They're strong like their mother." "I'm not strong," Nora confessed. "I'm terrified." "Being scared doesn't mean you aren't brave," Cole said, his voice gentle in the darkness. "It just means the thing you're doing matters." Nora turned to look at him, really look at him. The moonlight silvered his profile, highlighting the straight nose, the firm jaw, the small scar near his temple. He was a handsome man, yes, but it was more than that. There was a steadiness to him, a certainty that drew her like a beacon. "Did you mean it?" she asked. "About staying, about marriage." Cole met her gaze directly. "Every word." "Why? You could have any woman without the burden of another man's children, a struggling farm." "Maybe I don't want any woman," Cole said simply. "Maybe I want you with everything that comes with you." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I wasn't looking for this, Nora, but sometimes life puts you exactly where you're supposed to be, even when you're looking the other way." Nora's heart pounded in her chest. "The children need stability. They need to know you won't just disappear one day." "I won't," Cole promised. "I know what it is to lose a parent. I wouldn't do that to them." The conviction in his voice resonated with something deep inside Nora. "You lost your parents young." "My father before I was born," Cole nodded. "My mother when I was 12. I know what James and Sarah are feeling." Nora's hand tightened around his. "I'm sorry." Cole shrugged slightly. "It was a long time ago, but it's why I understand what your children need." His eyes held hers. "What they need is someone who will be there day after day, someone who will teach James to be a man, who will cherish Sarah's gentle heart, someone who will stand beside their mother as she rebuilds her life." "And what about the man you're hunting?" Nora asked. "Could you really give up that search?" Cole was silent for a long moment. "The man I'm tracking killed a woman near Laramie 2 years ago, shot her husband too, but he lived long enough to describe the killer, left 2 young children orphaned." His voice had gone flat, emotionless. "I was the U.S. Marshal who found them hiding in a root cellar. They'd been there for 2 days. Nora felt a chill despite the warm night. "That's why you've hunted him so long." "Yes," Cole admitted, "but maybe there are other ways to honor that promise. Maybe giving James and Sarah a father again is its own kind of justice." The depth of emotion in his voice moved Nora profoundly. This was not a man making idle promises or seeking a convenient arrangement. This was a man offering his heart, his future, his very self. "I need to be sure," she said softly. "For their sake, not just mine." Cole nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I'll wait as long as it takes." The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Cole continued to work on the farm, making improvements that would increase its value and productivity. He took James fishing, built a swing for Sarah from an old wagon wheel, and each night sat on the porch with Nora, talking about everything and nothing as the stars wheeled overhead. Nora watched him with her children, saw how naturally he stepped into the role of father figure, firm but kind with James, gentle and patient with Sarah. She saw, too, how they bloomed under his attention, how the shadows of grief began to recede from their young faces. And she felt herself changing as well. The weight of solitary responsibility that had pressed down on her for so long began to lift. She laughed more easily, slept more soundly. She caught herself watching Cole as he worked, admiring not just his physical strength but the integrity that seemed to infuse his every action. One evening, as they sat together on the porch after the children were asleep, Nora finally spoke the words that had been building in her heart. "Yes," she said simply. Cole looked at her, a question in his eyes. "Yes, I'll marry you," Nora clarified, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "If you still want to." The smile that broke across Cole's face was like sunrise after a long night. Without a word, he pulled her to him, his lips finding hers in a kiss that was both tender and fierce. Nora melted against him, her arms winding around his neck as she returned the kiss with all the longing that had built inside her. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the first moment I saw you in Pine Creek," he admitted. Nora laughed softly. "Why didn't you?" "Didn't think a proper lady like you would appreciate being kissed by a dusty stranger," Cole said with a wry smile. "Maybe not then," Nora agreed, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "But now you're not a stranger anymore." Cole captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "No, I'm not. And I never will be again." They were married 3 days later by the circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Pine Creek. It was a simple ceremony in the town church, with Sheriff Miller and Mrs. Wilson as witnesses, and James and Sarah standing proudly at their mother's side. Nora wore her best dress, a faded blue calico that Cole swore made her eyes shine like the summer sky. Cole had bought a new shirt for the occasion and had even trimmed his beard. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, the look in Cole's eyes as he kissed her made Nora blush to the roots of her hair. That night, after a celebratory supper at which James and Sarah had barely contained their excitement, Cole carried his new bride across the threshold of the cabin that was now truly their home. "Happy, Mrs. Nicholson?" he asked, setting her gently on her feet. "Very," Nora replied, still marveling at her new name, "though I think I'm not the only one." She nodded toward the children's bedroom where James and Sarah had finally succumbed to sleep after the excitement of the day. Cole's expression softened. "They're good children. You've done a fine job with them. We'll do even better together," Nora said, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her head against his chest. The steady thump of his heart beneath her ear was the most reassuring sound she'd ever heard. Cole tilted her face up to his. "I promise you, Nora, I'll be a good father to them and a good husband to you." "I know you will," Nora whispered, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him. "I know." Life settled into a new rhythm at the Nicholson farm. Cole paid off the bank loan with money he'd saved during his years as a marshal and bounty hunter. With the threat of foreclosure gone, they focused on making the farm profitable again. Cole repaired the irrigation ditches, planted alfalfa in the lower fields, and added to their small herd of cattle with quality stock purchased from a neighboring ranch. James thrived under Cole's guidance, eagerly learning everything from how to rope a calf to how to track game in the desert. Sarah attached herself to Cole with the wholehearted devotion of a 5-year-old, declaring him "my new pa" to anyone who would listen. And Nora blossomed like a desert flower after rain. The constant worry that had etched lines around her eyes began to fade. She smiled more, laughed often, and at night in the privacy of their bedroom discovered the joy of being truly loved by a man who cherished her body and soul. Winter came to the Arizona territory, bringing cooler temperatures but little snow. Christmas approached, and with it, an unexpected blessing. Nora confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: she was expecting a child. When she told Cole, his face transformed with such joy that it brought tears to her eyes. He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around the kitchen as she laughingly protested. "Careful, the baby." Cole set her down immediately, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our baby." James and Sarah were equally excited about the prospect of a new sibling. though James solemnly announced that he would have to teach the baby everything he knew, which might take some time. Christmas Eve found the family gathered around the fireplace, the children hanging stockings that Nora had carefully mended for the occasion. Cole had ridden to town earlier in the week and returned with small gifts for everyone, which now sat wrapped in brown paper beneath the juniper branch they decorated with paper stars and strings of dried berries. As the children chattered excitedly about what Santa might bring, a sudden knock at the door silenced the room. Visitors were rare, especially on Christmas Eve, and especially with the temperature dropping toward freezing outside. Cole's hand moved instinctively toward the gun belt hanging by the door, but he stopped short of drawing the weapon. "Stay here," he told Nora and the children, his voice low. He opened the door cautiously, revealing a man bundled against the cold, his horse steaming in the frigid air behind him. "Cole Nicholson?" the stranger asked. "That's me. Telegraph for you from Tucson." The man handed over a yellow envelope. "Station master paid me $5 to bring it out here tonight, said it was urgent." Cole thanked the messenger and pressed a coin into his hand before closing the door. His expression was unreadable as he tore open the envelope and read the message inside. "What is it?" Nora asked, concern tightening her throat. Cole looked up, a complex mixture of emotions crossing his face. "They caught him, the man I was tracking. He tried to rob a bank in Prescott, got shot by the guard. He's alive, but barely. They want me to come identify him, testify at his trial if he survives." Nora's heart sank. Despite the months of happiness, a part of her had always feared this moment when Cole's past would call him away. "When do you need to leave?" "First light would be best," Cole said, his voice flat. "It's a 3-day ride to Tucson." The festive mood evaporated like morning dew. James and Sarah sensed the tension, their excited chatter fading to silence. Nora forced a smile for their sake. "Well then, we should open our gifts tonight, shouldn't we? Since Pa has to leave tomorrow." Cole's eyes met hers across the room, gratitude and regret mingling in their blue depths. "That sounds like a fine idea." They tried to salvage the evening for the children's sake. Presents were opened with appropriate exclamations of delight, a carved wooden horse for James, a rag doll with real hair for Sarah, a new shawl for Nora. Cole received a hand-knitted scarf from Nora and drawings from both children. But an undercurrent of sadness pervaded what should have been a joyous occasion. After the children were finally asleep, dreams of Christmas morning temporarily eclipsing their disappointment about Cole's imminent departure, Nora found her husband on the porch. Despite the cold, he stood without a coat, staring up at the star-filled sky. "You should come inside," Nora said softly, wrapping her shawl, his gift, around her shoulders. "It's freezing out here." Cole turned, his expression troubled. "I'm sorry, Nora, about the timing." "It's not your fault," she said, meaning it. "You've waited a long time for this." "I'm not going," Cole said suddenly, decisively. Nora blinked in surprise. "What? I'm not going," he repeated. "Someone else can identify him. I'm needed here." Hope flared in Nora's chest, but she tempered it with caution. "Cole, this has been your mission for 2 years. You can't just abandon it now." Cole stepped closer, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "It's not my mission anymore. My mission is here with you and James and Sarah and our baby." His voice softened. "Those children in Wyoming, they have an aunt raising them now. They're safe, loved. Me testifying won't bring their parents back." "But justice is important," Cole agreed. "But so is mercy and love." He cupped her face in his hands. "I choose love, Nora. I choose our family." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes. "Are you sure? I don't want you to regret this later." "The only thing I would regret is missing Christmas morning with our children," Cole said firmly, "missing any moment with you and them." He placed a gentle hand on her stomach. "With all of you." Nora's heart swelled with such love that it felt too large for her chest. "I love you, Cole Nicholson. And I love you, Nora Nicholson." Cole's kiss was a promise, a pledge more binding than any telegraph or duty. "Now let's go inside before you catch your death. I've got a feeling tomorrow's going to be a good day." Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, with a dusting of rare snow that made the desert landscape glitter like diamonds. The children woke at first light, their excited voices pulling Cole and Nora from sleep. Santa came. Sarah's voice rang through the cabin. "Ma, Pa, come see," Cole chuckled, pulling Nora close for a quick kiss before they both rose to join the children. The simple gifts in the stocking's oranges, candy sticks, small wooden toys that Cole had carved in secret were received with as much delight as if they'd been made of gold. As Nora prepared breakfast, she watched Cole with the children, his deep laugh filling the cabin as James demonstrated how his new wooden horse could jump over the back of the sofa. Sarah sat on Cole's lap, carefully brushing her new doll's yarn hair and explaining its imaginary life story in great detail. This, Nora thought, was the true gift of Christmas, not the presents or the special meal, but the love that filled their home, the family they had built together from the broken pieces of their separate lives. Later that day, as Cole and James built a small snowman in the yard, Sarah helping by rolling tiny snowballs for decoration, Nora stood in the doorway watching them. Her hand rested on her still flat stomach, where new life grew, a symbol of the future they were building together. Cole looked up, catching her eye. The love in his gaze warmed her more effectively than the fire burning in the hearth behind her. He said something to James, then made his way to her side. "Happy?" he asked softly, wrapping an arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Nora replied honestly. Cole's eyes moved to the children, now engaged in an impromptu snowball fight. "They've changed since I first met them. There's more laughter now," Nora nodded, leaning into his solid warmth. "They were so solemn before, especially James. Trying so hard to be grown up. They needed someone to shoulder that burden," Cole said, "so they could be children again." A sudden thought struck Nora. "Cole, when we first met, when you offered to help with the children, you seemed to understand what they needed even then." Cole was quiet for a moment, his gaze still on James and Sarah. "I recognized something in them," he finally admitted. "The same look I saw in those children in Wyoming, the same look I must have had when my own mother died." Nora turned in his arms, studying his face. "Is that why you stayed?" "Because of what happened to those children?" "Partly," Cole acknowledged. "But mostly because of you, Nora, your strength, your love for them. The way you looked at me that first night in the line shack, like you were afraid to hope but couldn't quite help yourself." His lips curved in a gentle smile. "I think I started falling in love with you right then." Nora stood on tiptoe to kiss him, a kiss full of promise and future and hope. When they broke apart, she rested her head against his chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "Ma, Pa." "Come play," James called, a rare childish excitement in his voice. Cole looked down at Nora, eyebrows raised in question. She laughed and nodded, and together they joined the children in the yard, the winter sun casting long shadows across the snow. That night, after the excitement of the day had finally worn the children out and they slept deeply in their room, Cole and Nora lay together in their bed, his hand resting protectively over her stomach. "I was thinking," Cole said quietly, "we should build an addition to the house before the baby comes. Give James and Sarah each their own room." Nora smiled in the darkness. "Already planning, are you? That's what fathers do, isn't it?" Cole's voice held a hint of uncertainty that touched Nora deeply. Despite his natural ease with the children, he was still learning what it meant to be a father. "Yes," she assured him, covering his hand with hers. "That's exactly what fathers do, and you're a wonderful father, Cole." He was quiet for a moment. "I want to be what they need," he finally said. "All three of them, 4 soon." The wonder in his voice when he spoke of their unborn child never failed to move her. "You already are," Nora promised. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been lingering in her mind. "Will you ever regret it? Not going to Tucson?" Cole's arm tightened around her. "Never," he said firmly. "Some trails are worth abandoning when you find something more precious waiting at home." Nora snuggled closer, contentment washing over her like a warm tide. "I never thought I'd have this again," she confessed. "After Thomas disappeared, I was so focused on survival that I couldn't imagine happiness." "And now," Cole prompted gently. "Now I can't imagine anything else," Nora said simply. Spring came to the Arizona territory, bringing wildflowers to the desert and new life to the Nicholson farm. Nora's pregnancy progressed smoothly, her belly rounding beneath her aprons. Cole fretted over her like a mother hen, insisting she rest frequently and taking on more of the household chores. James and Sarah watched the changes in their mother with fascination. Sarah would often place her small hands on Nora's stomach, giggling when she felt the baby kick. James was more reserved but no less interested. asking practical questions about where the baby would sleep and whether it would cry all night like the Wilsons' new baby in town. As Nora's due date approached, Cole finished the addition to the house 2 small bedrooms for the children, with a third, smaller room that would serve as a nursery. He built a cradle from pine boards, sanding it until it was silky smooth, and Nora lined it with soft quilting she'd sewn during the quiet winter evenings. "It's perfect," she told him, running her hand over the polished wood. "Our baby will sleep so well here." Cole's expression was a mixture of pride and apprehension. "I just want everything to be ready, safe." Nora understood his concern. Childbirth on the frontier was always dangerous, even with the town doctor only 5 miles away. She'd been fortunate with James and Sarah, but she knew many women who hadn't been so lucky. "Everything will be fine," she assured him, though her own anxiety sometimes kept her awake at night. "This baby is strong like its father." The birth, when it came, was quicker than Nora had expected. Cole had just enough time to send James to fetch the doctor before Nora's waters broke. And less than 3 hours later, their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that brought tears to Cole's eyes. "She's beautiful," he whispered, cradling the tiny, red-faced infant as if she were made of spun glass. "Perfect." Nora, exhausted but radiant, watched her husband holding their child. "What shall we call her?" They had discussed names but hadn't settled on one, wanting to see the baby first. Now, looking at the tiny girl with her shock of dark hair, Cole's hair, Nora knew. "Hope," she said softly. "Hope Nicholson." Cole's eyes met hers, understanding and approval in their blue depths. "Hope," he repeated, testing the name. "It suits her." James and Sarah were allowed in to meet their new sister, both wide-eyed with wonder at the tiny, perfect fingers and toes, the rosebud mouth that yawned enormously, the dark blue eyes that seemed to look at nothing and everything. "She's so small," James marveled. "Was I that small?" "Even smaller," Nora told him with a smile. "You were in a hurry to be born." Sarah, unusually solemn, touched the baby's cheek with one careful finger. "Hello, Hope," she whispered. "I'm your big sister." Cole put his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "You're going to be a wonderful big sister," he assured her. "Hope is very lucky to have you and James looking out for her." Sarah beamed at him, pride straightening her small shoulders. "I'll help Ma take care of her," she promised. "I can fetch diapers and sing to her when she cries." "And I'll teach her to ride when she's bigger," James added, not to be outdone. "And fish and track rabbits," Cole chuckled. "Sounds like Hope has quite an education ahead of her." As the children continued to make plans for their sister's upbringing, Nora caught Cole's eye over their heads. The love and contentment she saw there mirrored what she felt in her own heart, a sense of completion, of rightness, as if the final piece of a puzzle had fallen into place. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Hope in her cradle beside the bed, James and Sarah in their new rooms, Cole sat on the edge of the bed, watching Nora brush her hair. The simple domestic ritual seemed to fascinate him. "What are you thinking about so seriously?" Nora asked, catching his reflection in the small mirror. "How lucky I am," Cole replied without hesitation. "How close I came to missing all this." Nora set down her brush and turned to face him. "What do you mean?" Cole took her hands in his expression thoughtful. "When I rode into Pine Creek that day, I was only planning to stay one night, just long enough to rest my horse, ask a few questions about a man who'd been seen in the area." He shook his head slightly. "If I'd left the next morning as I'd planned." "But you didn't," Nora reminded him, squeezing his hands. "You stayed." "Because I saw you," Cole said simply. "Standing there with the dust on your skirts and worry in your eyes, and something inside me just stopped, like a clock winding down, and I knew I needed to know who you were." The nakedness of the admission moved Nora deeply. Cole was not a man given to flowery declarations or poetic language. His words were always straightforward, honest, which made this confession all the more precious. "I'm glad you did," she said softly. Cole pulled her gently into his lap, mindful of her still tender body. "When I first saw James and Sarah, I knew they needed someone," he continued, his voice low. "They reminded me so much of those children in Wyoming, trying to be brave when their world had fallen apart." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And then, when we were caught in that storm and took shelter in the lined shack." Nora nodded against his shoulder, remembering that night, the rain hammering on the roof, the children sleeping by the fire, Cole's steady presence offering security she hadn't felt in months. "You said something to them," Cole continued. "When James had that nightmare and woke crying for his father, do you remember?" Nora had to think back. Those early days were somewhat blurred by grief and worry. "I think I told him his father loved him, that he would always be watching over him." "Yes," Cole agreed. "But it was how you said it, so gentle, so sure, even though you must have been hurting too. And later, when we were at your farm and the children were following me around." He paused and Nora waited, sensing he needed to find the right words for whatever memory had surfaced. "I said something about them missing their father," Cole finally continued. "I don't even remember exactly what, but you looked at me with those eyes that see everything and you said they miss their mother, and I didn't understand at first because you were right there. But then I realized that they missed who I used to be," Nora finished softly. "Before worry and grief changed me." Cole nodded. "And I said something about how children need stability, consistency, and you whispered, then I'll be gentle like she was." His arms tightened around her. "That's when I knew I loved you, Nora, that moment right there, because you were willing to find that softness again for them, even when life had made you hard." Tears sprang to Nora's eyes at the memory. She had forgotten that conversation, buried as it was beneath the avalanche of events that followed Cole's proposal, their marriage, the rebuilding of the farm and their lives. But now it came back to her with perfect clarity. The summer sun slanting through the barn door, Cole's serious face as he spoke of what children need, her own whispered promise. "And you've kept that promise," Cole continued, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You've given them back their mother, the one who laughs and sings and tells stories at bedtime. You've given Hope a mother who will teach her that same gentleness." "We both have," Nora corrected, framing his face with her hands. "You showed me how to find that person again, Cole. By shouldering some of the burden, by making me feel safe enough to be soft again." She kissed him, pouring all her love into the gesture. "We healed each other." Cole's arms enfolded her, his strength a shelter she no longer feared to depend on. "And we'll keep doing that every day for the rest of our lives," he promised. As if on cue, Hope stirred in her cradle, her small mewling cries announcing that she was hungry. Nora slipped from Cole's lap with a smile, lifting the tiny girl and settling back against the pillows to nurse her. Cole watched them, wonder and contentment written plainly on his face. Then he stretched out beside them, one arm curved protectively around Nora's shoulders, the other hand gently stroking Hope's dark hair. Outside, the desert night was alive with sounds: coyotes calling, the whisper of wind through sage, the distant lowing of cattle in the paddock. Inside, the small cabin was quiet save for Hope's soft nursing sounds and the steady, synchronized breathing of her parents. It was enough. More than enough, it was everything.